Welcome to another episode of Moral Injury International. I'm Marty here in Melbourne. Now, we have a very special guest tonight, Dr. Daniel Roberts, who's the President and CEO of Moral Injury Support Network for Servicewomen in the US. And I've got to give a trigger warning on these conversations that we're going to be having, is that if it triggers anything in your head, or brings back something, is please switch off and get some professional counseling. Okay, and moving with that, I've got my good friend and colleague from Moral Injury International, Leo Quinlan, over in Ireland, and we've got Dr. Wally Jensen over in the States, both my friends and partners. So let's jump over and have a chat with them now. Dr. Daniel Roberts, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
A pleasure. Leo's here and Wally, as I just said.
Hello, Daniel. Dan. I'm Leo. I'm here in County Kerry in the southwest of Ireland. Normally, when we have these kind of podcasts, we kind of kick off for people who might be watching this for the first time, is to tell them where we're coming from in relation to moral injury. And it's lovely that Wally is with us tonight, because Wally is the person who first introduced me to moral injury. I think it was about January 2021. And anyway, just in layman terms, moral injury for us, and it started in military sense because we're mostly military here. And it's when soldiers suffer some traumatic experience and are then betrayed by higher authority. Now, it's the same, not just in military, but in prison services, police forces, hospital, public sector, private sector, prison sector, etc., all over the world, as we've discovered. We also identify the side effects of moral injury as we see them, and the three of us here all have some experience in moral injury, some more than others. But simply put, silence is the very obvious side effect of somebody suffering from moral injury. Lack of interaction with other people, broken marriages, broken relationships, alcoholism, maybe depression, and unfortunately, in many cases, suicide. So that's just the way we kind of introduce it. We don't put ourselves forward as experts in how to recover from moral injury, or we're not doctors or whatever. Our mission in these podcasts is very simply to raise the awareness of moral injury. So with that in mind, we'd love to hear what you would like to tell us about moral injury, your experience of it, or knowledge of it, or what you do, and we'll take it from there. And we'll try not to interject too much, but if we have a question, we'll just jump in. So if I may, can I hand it over to you and you take it from here, Dan?
Okay, sure. So I learned about moral injury a few years ago, would have been 2018, I think, 2017. Dr. Harold Koenig was doing a talk about moral injury at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to a group of chaplains, and I heard about it. So I had just finished my dissertation, was just officially a doctor, and so I went to hear this talk, and I was blown away by it, and it immediately clicked in. And because my research focused on the experience of military women, my first thought was we need to do research on moral injury for military women, and get into that. So that began a multi-year study of moral injury, in which we interviewed 50 women veterans and their moral injury experiences. They were either like on video interviews, or some of them did anonymous surveys, because they said I'll get too triggered if I try to tell my story. And so the very first woman I interviewed started the interview, once we got through like the demographics, the first thing I remember her saying is, I was forced to have an abortion at my first unit. And that was the beginning of many other, like, quote unquote unbelievable stories. It really shook my tree because this happened to her shortly after 9/11. She joined because of 9/11 and stuff. So that began like a series of really tragic stories about their moral injury experiences. And um, one of the things one of the early things I gained from those experiences or those hearing those stories is that while moral injury was originally sort of cast as something that combat veterans experience or combat men in combat experience, that's sort of how it initially evolved with Dr. Shea, working with Vietnam veterans. And I don't think he ever intended it to only be about combat veterans, but that kind of how it start was. That's who he was talking to, and so as I hear these, I go, okay, for women who some experience combat, but for a lot of women, it's sexual harassment, sexual assault, things that happen to them by the people they're supposed to trust the most, commanders, supervisors, fellow soldiers. Not always sexual. It can be other things. It can be like a woman who does everything supposed to do, go to the schools, gets a rank, becomes a captain, a lieutenant, and then gets treated as if her rank is meaningless and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of like social kind of things that can happen to them. And that sort of, didn't change, doesn't change the definition of moral injury, but it gives it context to for women. Um, and one of the other things that I learned in looking through all that data is the loss of self-identity that was very common, right? So women join the military with one personality, and then after their moral injury experiences became something else. Not just, um, and we all joined the military and became something else, right? We all had identity changes. I was in the U.S. Army for many years. Um, each of you were in the service. I see you were in the Navy and so on. So we all get a new identity when we come in, but a lot of our personality more or less uh, doesn't change that much, right? We may become more confident, more bold, um, curse more or whatever, right? Like some things happen, but what these women experience is their change of identity, change of self, didn't have to do with the military conditioning. That was fine. It had to do with self-protection from fellow service members. Like a woman might come in like very um, outward going, um, flirtatious, like, or at least just very, I don't know a better word, but just effervescent, whatever. But after some of these experiences becomes totally different, quiet, withdrawn, um, you know, avoids, like tries to disguise her femininity because of sexual assaults and stuff like that. We see a similar thing with men, or anybody maybe after some combat experiences, you come back from a deployment very withdrawn, very, you know, it's a similar kind of change, but for different reasons, often. And this loss of identity has a real um, negative side to it of like, I don't really know who I am now. I don't know. I was this person at one point. Now I'm something different. I don't really like who I am now, but I'm also afraid to change because it's protecting me. It protected me, like that sort of thing. So we see some of that too. And then the other thing, what's interesting about moral injury as a term is when you explain it to people, um, they may say, "I've never heard of that term, moral injury. Tell me about it." And you give them something like Leo said, something traumatic event that you experience, witness, or the target of, or or even observe that violates your deeply held moral beliefs. And it's like, oh, I get that. And immediately they start thinking of things that they've either experienced or they saw. And so um, I think it is important to point out. Um, I kind of like Litz's definition. I think it's Litz. I mean, a lot of them are researching together, but where we talk about um, it's something you could have participated in, something you could have seen or been witness to, something you could have been the target of, or with some of the women that I interviewed, they just heard about it and it violated them. So, for instance, like hearing about um, what happened to a friend and then that friend not being able to do anything about it and them being injured themselves. So that's a few things that I wanted to that came to the top of mind for me. And I guess the last thing I would say before, if I take questions or whatever, is um, I think it could be useful in further research to sort of think about the difference between moral conflict, um, like a moral dilemma, moral conflict, and moral injury, right? If we had a spectrum because we all see things on a regular basis that we find to be morally reprehensible, right? You just have to turn on the TV, but it doesn't. It violates our moral beliefs, right? Because we know it's wrong, but it doesn't affect us at a really deep level. Um, that 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 causes to have difficulty coping, right? And I think that's a difference. If I don't watch the news, but if I were to watch the news and I were to hear about, you know, a murder in Raleigh or something, that certainly is a violation of my morals. I certainly know it's wrong, but it doesn't affect me personally in a way that makes me lose sleep and um, wonder where's God in all this and have a religious crisis and so on and so forth. I mean, I probably should, but we're sort of numb to those things, right? And then there's a moral conflict, which is, um, things I experienced at work, even in the Army Chaplaincy Corps. My last unit, I was at a three-star command, so we were in charge of all the Army Reserve chaplains. And you have enough chaplains. There's like 2,800 of them. You have enough chaplains. Somebody's always going to be getting in trouble. And then you see those reports to the commander about chaplain so and so doing something so and so really reprehensible. And then so you know that, but then maybe some of the lack of action that was taken to hold those chaplains accountable really violent, was a real moral conflict for me and made me think about leaving the Corps at times, but it wasn't to the degree of trauma that a moral injury is, um, where I'm violated personally in a deep way, to where I have trouble sleeping, I lose my sense of identity, so on and so forth, like those kind of things. And so I don't think we have good research on that. I think it's useful for when I talk about moral injury for people I'm trying to help. I keep the definition pretty plain. I don't get into a lot of minutia because they just need to know, oh, a name for what they've experienced. But I think from a research academic, practitioner standpoint, it would be useful to think about and do some research on maybe a spectrum that would help, really differentiate moral injury from some of the other, moral sufferings that we might experience on a regular basis.
Absolutely. Wally, can I bring you in there?
Sure.
Okay.
Dan, let me give you just a quick background of who I am and how I got to where we're doing here. I had a rather non-productive first year of undergraduate school. I went off to university in 1966, the fall of 1966. And at the end of that year, the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences called me into his office for a conversation. and invited me to take some time off, which I thought was a great deal because here I am, I finished one not so great academic year, and he's offering me a sabbatical. I thought, yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah. Right.
It took me a while to sort of figure out that isn't what he was inviting me to do. He was inviting me to take some time, go grow up, learn something about life, learn something about yourself, which I did. And I volunteered for the draft. And my thinking was that if I volunteered for the draft, the Army will certainly take me, and they will be so happy to have me that clearly they'll send me off to Germany where I can drink good German beer and chase women. That shows you how out of touch with reality I was at the time. I was one of those guys that had all of life's answers and none of life's questions. So yeah, I volunteered for the draft in April, May of 1967. I got my draft notice fairly quickly after that, and the end of August and September, I went down for my physical to the induction center in Fargo, North Dakota. I grew up on a farm in North Dakota. And 2 days later, I was on an airplane headed for Tacoma, Washington to Fort Lewis to start basic training. So I went through all of that and thinking that I was going to be one of the guys that got orders to Germany. I actually got orders to Vietnam, South Vietnam. And initially I was to go to the 9th Infantry Division, but I wound up with the 25th Infantry Division, the Cu Chi, because at the time I got to Cu Chi the last week and a half of January 1968, right in the middle of the Tet Offensive.
Yeah,
I spent the next year, the worst year for Americans in Vietnam, in terms of casualties and what was going on. And so I also got assigned to the 125th Signal Battalion of the 25th Infantry Division. And so we were doing radio relay carrier operations, and I was going out in the field with artillery units, batteries, with infantry companies, and occasionally with some of the armored cavalry. And I spent my year, and I realized at the time when I was ready to come back to the world, the Army said, if you come back with 6 months or less time remaining in active duty, we'll just let you go home. So I thought that sounded pretty good. I volunteered to extend my time in Vietnam by an extra almost 40 days. So I spent 13 months, a little over 13 months in Vietnam. And I got I'd made a decision that I really was not going to stay in the Army. And so I applied back to the University of North Dakota to be readmitted, which I got a letter back fairly quickly. And some of that had to do with the fact that I was out with an artillery battery out near Dao Tiang in the Michelin rubber plantation, the Hobo Woods, as we call them. And the commander of that battery had been my assistant professor of military science at the University of North Dakota. So we had kind of a reunion. Nice. He introduced me to some of his fellow officers. I was at the time an E5, and he introduced me as one of his non-productive students. We had a good chat. But in talking with him, I realized that I really needed to go back to school, and I wanted to go back to school, so I did. Came back to Traverse Air Force Base, went to Oakland Army Terminal for out processing, and we had to stay for, I guess it was about 2 days. I was out in the boonies, came back in, went back to the States, and they made me a brand new service dress green uniform. It was spectacular. And I said to my first sergeant, Lovelace T. Perkins, who was just one of my heroes. He's probably one of the best senior NCOs I've ever met. Just have great respect and fondness for him. And he said, you and I need to have a conversation. I said, First Sergeant, you know that I respect you. I really like you. We're friends. Don't bother giving me the re-enlistment speech, because you could make me the Chief of Staff of the United States Army and I wouldn't stay in.
Yeah.
And so I get that. But so we went through, and he gave me some good advice about what I was going to experience when I got back home. And he was mostly right and almost completely wrong. I had anticipated that I would come back and I'd go back home. My family would be happy to see me. I'd go back to the life that I had before. And so we spent the extra couple of days at Oakland Army Terminal where they made this brand new uniform. And I went outside, had my papers, my flight back to North Dakota, went to San Francisco International Airport, and was surprised that they actually had a committee standing at the front door of San Francisco International Airport greeting people coming back home. I thought, this is pretty neat. And as I walked up to the front door, they kind of circled around me, spit at me, and called me an effing baby killer. And I thought, this is not exactly what I was anticipating.
Right.
I get back to North Dakota, and my uncle was a World War II veteran, had been in the Army, and he had instructed the family. He was a kind of a surrogate father for me, because my father died when I was 16, and he said to me, he didn't say to me, he welcomed me home, but then I realized that the rest of the family wasn't saying anything to me. And I thought, well, this is a little bit strange. And he had instructed them, do not ask Wally any questions when he gets home. And so I thought, well, okay. And so I went to church. I think I got home like on a Friday, went to church on Sunday, church I'd grown up in. Baptized, confirmed, and very active in that church. And a little town of 1,500 people out in the country, small town. And I'm sitting in there, and there were about of that little town of 1,500 people, there were about 12 of us who were in the Army in Vietnam at the same time. A week after I had arrived in country, one of my very best friends, whom I spent his last night at home with, kind of celebrating and wishing him well and carrying on with, 1 week after I got in country, he was killed. He was with the 11th Armored Cavalry and got killed in a gunfight. And the others were still in Vietnam. I was the first one that came home, walking and talking and pretending to be alive.
Right.
And sitting in the pew where my dad and I had sat many times together, Easter Sundays, festivals, whatever. And the pastor preached the most virulent anti-war sermon I have ever heard in my life. And I'm looking around, and I'm the only combat veteran in the congregation that particular Sunday. So who do you think I thought he was talking to?
Yeah, of course. Right.
And so the welcoming committee at San Francisco International, my uncle meaning well and trying to take care of me, my family trying to do what they thought perhaps was the best. Don't talk to him, don't upset him. The pastor doing his anti-war thing. And my experience from that was that something was very different and I couldn't figure out what it was. And I eventually wound up back in school in September. This was the end of March, and I spent a little time trying to readjust. So I had my 20th birthday in Puchi, back from the field, and so I had to wait for about 3.5, 4 weeks before I could legally drink a beer. I could kill people. That was okay. They paid me extra money for that, but in order to have a beer, I had to wait.
Yeah.
And so I got a little chippy, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. I just couldn't figure out what was going on. I didn't really understand what was happening. And I came to the conclusion in September when I went back to school that the problem was with my friends who had stayed in school and I hadn't seen for a couple of years, were, I thought, younger than I was. And so I said to myself, the only way I could explain it was that in Vietnam, during those 13 months, I had lost my youth.
Yeah.
And that didn't make sense to me. I didn't understand what that meant, but I had no language for it.
Right.
And things got progressively worse. So I live in Alexandria, Virginia now. We've lived here for a long time. I live about 10 minutes out of the back gate at Fort Belvoir. So I'm right close to Mount Vernon and Fort Belvoir.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't find home.
Yeah.
My wife Rita and I had been dating. I met her when she was 15. I just turned 16. Her parents were from my hometown in North Dakota, but lived here in Arlington. She was born in Alexandria, grew up in Arlington, and we got married in December of 1969. And we've been together ever since. So we're now coming up close on 57 years of being married together, and we're still happily in love. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. She has saved my life on more than one occasion, and she didn't really know that. I tried to talk to her about it, but I couldn't.
Yeah.
And in 2017, I co-authored a book called Moral Warriors, Moral Wounds with a friend and colleague of mine who was a seminary professor. I came back, went to seminary, got ordained, was in a parish for about 9 years before I went into the Navy Reserve as a chaplain. And then I spent 20 years as a Navy chaplain. I was medically retired with multiple myeloma. That is presumptively caused by Agent Orange that I picked up in trees and grass and wherever else I was. And so I got medically retired, and I just gotten selected for captain. I was in 06 when I retired, and I thought, this is going to be a great finish to my career. And suddenly I'm facing a physical evaluation board and dealing with the VA and dealing with all kinds of people who had all good reasons for me not to do what I thought I should be doing. And so it was a new chapter in my life. In the process, I writing this book particularly, we were in Florida, and I went out got up early one morning, was out on the balcony, and it was a beautiful evening or a very beautiful morning, had a cup of coffee overlooking a golf course. And I was working on a chapter, and it was what I sort of imagined divine inspiration was. I started typing, and the computer just did all the work. I just sat there moving my fingers, and things were appearing on my screen. And Rita came out, and she's an incredibly honest person, sometimes too honest. And so she came out, and I said, "Would you do me a favor?" And she said, "Of course. What do you need?" I said, "Would you read this chapter? I just finished it, and let me know what you think about it." She's a great editor. She's brilliant. So she said, of course. So she said, I'm gonna take it inside the apartment, and I'm gonna make myself some breakfast, and I'll read it. And when I'm finished, I'll come out. I thought, okay, that's great. So she did. She takes my laptop. She goes inside. I'm sitting out there drinking coffee. She walked inside, and about 45 seconds later, I say to myself, "This was not a good idea, and I shouldn't have given this to her. I shouldn't have asked her to read it. It was not a good idea." So 30 minutes later, she hasn't come back out. 45 minutes later, an hour later, I'm thinking to myself,
Wow.
I wonder if I could find the number of a good divorce attorney, because I'm probably going to need it.
Yeah, right.
And it took her about 2 hours, and she came out. When she came out, she's carrying the laptop, tears running down her cheeks. And I said to myself, oh shit, this was not a good idea. And she sat down, she said to me, why did you never tell me this?
Yeah.
And I said, I didn't want you to look at me and see me in this light. I don't want you to think of me as this young soldier.
Yeah.
She said, do you really think I didn't know? And I said, well, I guess. And she said, you know, you really are a dumb farmer. She said, I sleep with you. I wake you up from your bad dreams. And you think I didn't know? Of course I knew. And it was one of the most healing moments I've ever experienced in my life. Because she wasn't thinking about divorce attorneys. She wasn't thinking about this vision that I had of the way she'd look at me.
She's still with you, Wally, and I think that's what it is about. The women suffer as much, you know, and what you're doing, Daniel, is the women suffer as much, whether they're at home or at war, you know, on that. Now, we're getting close to our time. Leo, can I bring you in, please?
Dan, Marty and I have heard some of what Wally was talking about already, but there's some new things there that are very interesting. What Wally hasn't mentioned too much of, and I hope correct what I'm saying, Wally, you're a Bronze Star medal winner from Vietnam. Okay, we don't know precisely why. You haven't told us. We don't expect you to. But by your own admission, moral injury is a factor for you. So obviously, what happened in Vietnam, and you glossed over it pretty fast, and I don't expect you to tell us tonight. I just want to, for Dan's benefit, to know that something happened in Vietnam. You won a Bronze Star. I take my hat off to you for that. A few things there that's popping up between the two of you, just Dan and Wally. You could have a great conversation about everything and so on. There's a word that we use. I think it might have been you, Wally, that used it first about moral injury. It's not different from post-traumatic stress, and in the Irish scenario, because we're a little bit religious at times in Ireland, moral injury, and it's a good way of describing it. It's an injury to the soul.
Yes.
And I've just wondered if Dan can agree with that, because when we have spoken to families of veterans that came back from Jadaville in the Congo, my father commanded those, Dan, that in that battle. A lot of them, they now, the penny drops when we talk to them, and they think, oh yeah, injured to soul, that explains my dad, that explains my granddad, that explains why the family are not talking to each other, that explains why they never hugs and kiss after coming back from combat, and so on and so forth. So I think that we're all kind of speaking the same language. And Dan, if I can ask you, we have the transgenerational effect that it's very obvious. Children of Jadaville and grandchildren of Jadaville are suffering the results of what happened in the battle in 1961, 64 years ago. With your people, Dan, the ladies and so on that you're talking about, does a transgenerational effect in there? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, for sure. I would say two groups. One of the other groups we researched, we interviewed 20 spouses of service members with PTSD, and about their experiences of living with a service member with PTSD and trauma that they've dealt with, and yeah, it has a profound effect on spouses, children, and of course that burdens children. They're going to carry that in. So a woman saying, "I can't," I there are times I can't be a mother, or I can't maintain control my emotions, and my husband just has to take the kids and go away. Or with the spouses saying, "Yeah, when he gets triggered, he's breaking things. My kids have had to deal with suicidal ideation. My kids have had to deal with him saying he's going to shoot himself and all this kind of stuff, right?" So you don't forget that. Now you have adverse childhood experiences, and then you carry that into your next relationship, marriage, or with your children. The next generation tries to learn from it, but you still, you might have these abandonment issues or these trigger. I know for my household, my dad was a Vietnam vet, and he would when he would lose control of his anger, he would just fly all over the place. And so now, if I'm in the room with somebody who, even if they're not directing violence at me, right, but they just get pissed off and start hollering and cursing whatever it is they're yelling at, whatever it is, like inside, it's like I'm 6 years old again or 8 years old again, where dad was, losing his shit, if you will, and I felt in danger.
Yeah.
And so then, that kills certain things inside of you, certain emotions that for many years I've had a hard time connecting to, like joy. And I could see other people being very happy, being joyous, being energetic, and going like, how come I can't be like that? I just couldn't read. Now, through some therapy and some help and stuff, I'm definitely improving. But the idea is, yes, that it does this kind of trauma in very different ways. Like, it can carry on. And we actually have science that shows that trauma can get passed through the genes to next generation. So there's both an emotional and a physiological effect from this stuff for sure.
That's what you've just said in the last sentence there is very powerful. I appreciate it because
Mm.
it means that we're on the right track with our thinking because we have ample evidence of it going down through the generations. And Marty, more than any of the four of us here, probably can talk all about that. As you probably, I think you know that Marty's dad and my dad were in the same battle together.
Mm.
Okay, so we have many things in common in that regard. And
Yeah, I think with the transgender, what you're saying, Dan, is you've just triggered it. You're 100%. And I know what you mean by that. It's like, I'll use the word is we didn't know who was coming in the front door. And the name of my book and that's coming out is my mom picked the name, God rest her, she's passed away. And I asked her why she stayed with him, came back, and she basically said, Marty, I loved him, but they sent the wrong man home,
Mm.
you know? And I think that's what is the transgenerational is especially like, all we knew was, well, we never knew who was coming in the front door. All we were related to was violence, abuse, torture,
Right. Right.
starvation. All of those were done to us. Now, it affects the six of us, I believe, like I think you were alluding to earlier, is with moral injury is there's certain degrees. And sometimes people don't know they have it until something, as you said, that triggers, might be an incident or whatever, and then triggers in your head. And also, just to go back to what you were saying there is, it does affect family. I mean, I've got 3 ex-wives and 5 kids. I mean, come on, tell me I couldn't make commitment, and that comes from, as Leo said, or that comes from growing up. They never used the words "I love you." You know, you
Right.
never got that because they came back, and then the silence and everything, it all matches in. But I must say, and even I can speak for my family on this, is that once you understand moral injury, or as Leo says, the penny drops, or as Wally explains it, is it's great. It actually gives you relief. And it
Yeah.
also gives you the empowerment
Yeah.
to be able to forgive the person.
Right.
You know, they were probably more damaged, even
Right.
though they didn't
Right.
damage you. Anyway, go ahead, Daniel, please. That's my two bobs.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And it's interesting, you talked about your mom. A lot of the spouses we interviewed said one of the reasons they were really conflicted over staying with the person, because on one hand it felt unsafe, other times it wasn't just unsafe, but then the kids had to see all this and what am I doing to my kids. On the other hand, they were like, it's not his fault. He deployed, he served his country, he went through some really bad stuff over there, and he did an honorable thing, and he come home with this. It's not his fault. And what kind of a person am I if I leave them? Who's going to take care of them? And so what kind of a person would I be if I left a person who needs my help? Because the VA can only help so much. I mean, even if they were 100% better, still somebody has to live with the person. Now, what some of the spouses have said is, if you don't get help, I will leave you. Um, and then they were able to say, hey, he's not willing to do his part, then I'm going to leave. But others are like, he's doing the best he can. He's trying to get the help he can. And so this conflict, their own moral injury, if you will, would be betrayal by the military, betrayal by the VA, not being able to give them the care they needed. And also, many of the service members were active duty, and so they would deploy, come back, then go to a school, then go to a new position as a commander. So in the span of a year and a half, maybe 2 years, the family had moved 3 times, and for 6 months to a year of that was a deployment. And so betrayal by the military of not being able to say they care about families, but doing that kind of stuff, which, um, but,
Do you
but
think,
really,
Dan,
I mean, I could go on and on about that, but
by their betrayal, there was no duty of care? And I can speak honestly about you talking about transgenerational. My mother couldn't see any way out because we lived on an army base, an army
right,
camp. And
right,
if he left the army, or if she reported him for violence within the house, then we would be homeless
right,
because, she didn't work. And then that
right.
drove her to, on our case, 6 attempted murder, suicide attempts on us children. Okay.
Mm,
And then I look at my dad's side. So I'm alluding to what you're saying there is that I've researched it myself, and even just from Jaredville, 10% of the men took their own lives, or some mental hospitals. But I find there's 2 different types of suicide, and especially within men. Women will do it quickly or whatever. Men will either drink themselves to death or just give up
mm,
on life and just
yeah,
exist with no existence. But the effect it had on the families, I mean, we always laughed and go, well, we 6 little fuckers, was that why she was trying to kill us? And I realized she was trying
right.
to kill us out of love, because she
Yeah,
had the moral
right,
injury, as in she didn't know
yeah,
what way to
right.
turn. Sorry, Dan, go ahead. I just need to chuck that in.
No, no, that's exactly right. I mean, it's what got us starting that research was a woman called me and said, I lost my marriage because of my husband's moral injury. Now that I'm divorced, there are no resources for me at all. And that goes to your point of Marty, of like, you're stuck in this if you want any kind of resources or help.
Yeah, yeah. Wally.
Yeah, one of the things, Dan, that I've kind of been pushing, and Leo and Marty have resonated with, and that is that we are not therapists. And there's a distinction. There are some similarities between moral injury and PTS, but they're
Yes,
different. And
absolutely.
you can moral PTS is a medical condition. You can diagnose it. You can
Hmm.
come up with a plan of treatment. You can help
Right.
people get better. I've quit using PTSD because I think that's not helpful. Post-traumatic stress is bad enough in of itself, but when you add the D to it, you can't get over those. You have to learn to live with them. You can't be cured. And so I talk about it, the similarities here, that the thing that happens is that there's a difference between guilt and shame.
Yes.
Guilt, if I do something to hurt you or offend you, I can say, Dan, I'm sorry, I apologize. I was out of line. I shouldn't have said it. I wish I hadn't said it. I will do my best never to do it again. And then you have the choice to say, I accept your apology or I don't. And if you accept it, then we can begin to work together and we can keep it. And if you say, I'm not forgiving you ever, well, that's a solution as well. Then you and I can never have a relationship. With moral injury, with the post-traumatic stress and the apology, I can say, I'm sorry. And then I can think of myself as a good person who did something wrong, but now I've either been forgiven or you're not going to forgive me, but I'm still a good person who did something wrong. And I can live with that. In moral injury, our self-perception changes. And we no longer see ourselves as good people who did something bad. We begin to see ourselves as bad people who do bad things.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's the result of shame. And so we're talking not as therapists, but as theologians, as I don't want to say pastoral counselors, because I don't want to get this therapeutic twist wrapped up about it here. I want us to stay. We're informants, we're instructors, we're teaching you about moral injury, we're teaching you what happened, we're giving you words to hear that, and we're giving you a safe and sacred space where you can address your shame. And then, so we have a slogan amongst ourselves, and we say, we lend our ears to give them their voices. And that's what Rita did for me. She gave me my voice.
Okay, guys, so we've got to get going. Sorry to cut you off, Wally, but we've only got, I know you've got another meeting, Daniel, haven't you, coming up. So I'd like to pass it over to Leo, and then if you can just go around, but then I'd like to give some advice, especially what you do with the women, and I thank you. I've got a lot of your people coming on, some lovely women with great stories, and I think that's important to get it out, and it's working together with you. So, Leo, can I pass over, and then we'll pass through for finishing up comments and advice.
Okay, we all seem to be on the same wavelength. Australian Army, the Irish Army, the American Army, etc. They all seem to suffer from the same affliction, i.e., they betray the people that have been put in harm's way. It has happened. And we've spoken before about the double whammy of moral injury, the way we see it in layman terms. The first whammy is when they suffer something or do something that goes against their moral fiber or the moral upbringing or their environment or whatever, or their religion. And then they are betrayed and there's no duty of care, as Marty has said. That's the second whammy. And it feeds onto them and the shame comes in and so on and so on and so forth. So I think if you agree, we're all on that kind of same wavelength. And the key to everything, in my opinion, is the double thing of no duty of care and the betrayal by people who put them in harm's way and then rejected them and threw them as a scrap heap afterwards. And I think this is where from the higher levels, this is where the problem lies. If there was one particular case with us, it was a young boy. He was only 16 years of age in the battle. He did a great job, recommended for a medal and a promotion to corporal. An amazing young man. He got nothing, and he left the army after Jadville, went to Australia, blew his head off with a shotgun years later. You know, I've written to the powers that be, if he had been properly treated when he came home, he might have had he would have had a normal, much better life. And this is this is a betrayal by higher authority. Anyway, I think we might all agree on that.
Absolutely. Dan, let me get your wrap up, and especially if you can we're putting your details of your organization up and the women that served in the army. But what advice would you give out, and then how people can contact you?
Yeah, I like what Wally said. It's really, what I try to do as I'm talking to women is just really get their story out, really help them tell their story, and whatever parts they want to tell. And I found that, um, that is cathartic. And so what I try to do is just be a really good asker of questions. And as they tell their story, I try to listen to places where they're stuck, places that where they're saying, I just can't, or I just feel this way, or I'm no good, or whatever. And I hear that kind of stuff, then that's what I want to sort of like, let's revisit that. Let's rethink of that. I recently was talking to a first sergeant who's a great first sergeant. She works really hard at her job. She takes care of soldiers really well, but she doesn't realize she does all this. She knows she does it. I mean, she does it because she's a great first sergeant, but all she can think about are all these years of being minimized and told like she's not a real soldier and all this stuff. And so as I talked to her, I was just ask her, so let me ask you as a first sergeant, what do you do on an average day? What kind of things? And before you know it, we were listing like 10, 12 things she does on a daily basis that makes her really good. A good person, a good first sergeant. I talk to my NCOs, I help soldiers with their pay problems. I help soldiers know what to wear. I help people come into my office and I listen to them, and it's the soldiers she's getting, they're just PCSing from one duty station to the next. So she's the reception company. And so they've got pay problems, they've got moving problems, they've got their shit is somewhere that they can't find, and their spouse is stressing out and all that stuff. And so she does all this great work to help soldiers every day, but she can't help but think of herself as being not a real soldier. And so just through a series of asking questions, she was able to say, you know what? I actually do really good things every day, and she was doing them because she really cared. And I said, probably because the way you've been mistreated, you would never consider treating someone like that. And she said, yeah, I was just telling a sergeant major who was pissed off that this person had just come in the army, first duty station, they were pregnant. And how they get pregnant if they're at basic training, very much like they must have been sleeping around, whatever. And she's like, Sergeant Major, you don't know that. She could have got pregnant on leave. I mean, you can't make those assumptions. You got to care for the, all this kind of stuff. And she said, I don't know if he listened or not, but I said, I bet it felt good to say that. She said, yeah, it really did. So that's my advice is just to be really good at being empathetic, listening, and as Wally said, giving them space to tell their story. And then we go find resources for them, and we say, okay, well, you're homeless. There's some nonprofits that do some great work there. You need some financial assistance. You need some help getting some food. Then we go to work in helping find those resources. But I don't know if it doesn't matter if it's man or woman. It's a big part of just like tell me your story, and building that trust can be can take some time. So um, but if you get somebody that's willing to open up with you a little bit, and as you know, Wally, it's very important to just really hold that story sacred. Um,
Absolutely.
and be that person that no matter what you say, I'm not going to blame you. I'm not going to criticize you. I'm just going to affirm. I mean, that does more for people than almost anything you can imagine. So,
And I
I
think
oftentimes will
Wally, if I
say,
pass over to Wally, but
yep,
Wally said it, and he came up with the slogan, which I love it, is lending our ears to giving their voices. That's just sitting back and listening to people. So, Wally, I'm going to let you finish up, please.
yeah. One of the things that I try to encourage people to do is we all know that there are safe spaces and there are sacred spaces, and we know that some sacred spaces are not safe, and some safe spaces
right.
are not sacred. And
Yeah.
so we try to create that space that's safe and sacred together where people can feel safe to talk about and tell their story. The other thing is to encourage people to understand that the one thing that shame cannot endure is light. And creating those spaces where people can tell their story, get their voices back, is shedding light on their shame, and that's what frees them from that burden.
Yeah, I like that.
Well, guys, can I say is Leo? Did you want to finish on anything there?
No.
No, you've done
been
your
good.
token there. Dan, can I say to you, it's been a pleasure to have you on, and I'm sure you'll come back on and join us. And Wally,
Absolutely.
always a pleasure, and thank you for your input. And Leo, and for our listeners here in Australia, all over the world, thank you very much for joining us. And you can see this podcast on moralinjuryinternational.com. Moralinjuryinternational.com. We'll see you on the next episode.